This is Designing Security Products, where we talk about the intersection of cybersecurity, research, and product design. I'm William Donnell, lead scientist at Sodium Halogen, and today we're talking with Micah Horvat, who is the product design manager at Edge Delta. Hi, Micah.
Hey, William. How's it going?
It is going all right, man. So we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button about some of the topics. And one thing I thought might be cool to just dive straight into, even before we talk about your background, is you were talking about the difference between observability and security. And so I thought we could start right there. What is the difference between it?
Yeah.
What's the difference between observability
and
security?
Observability is just making distributed systems observable. And so this is definitely useful for cybersecurity practitioners. It's adjacent to security. I came from a security background before working in observability, but basically, succinctly, we're targeting an SRE, a site reliability engineer, as our main user, but also like DevOps people and also security people. And, we're helping you keep the lights on, right? So we're basically giving you tools to understand, okay, I've got Amazon, I've got all this different infrastructure. It's all networked. It's all talking to each other. I've got microservices. Something goes wrong. Well, what went wrong? How do I diagnose it? How do I fix it? Right. And so observability is basically just allowing humans to understand what's going on in these really complex systems and diagnose problems. Not only diagnosing problems, but obviously there's security implications of that. You have a better understanding of your system. And so, when there are intrusions and things like that. So there's definitely overlap there. And then also just like cost control, like, are we spending too much for our network solutions, right? Or are we spending too little, right? Or do we need more capacity in a certain way, right? So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, great. And so you're talking about observability and security. And so it feels like a good place to then go back and say, okay, so how did you get into this world where you're needing to know the difference between observability and security?
Well, yeah, I needed to know the difference when I was interviewing at an observability company. But, they were interested in my background from a security standpoint. Like I said, there's a lot of overlap. One of the things that I noticed, so about 3 years ago when I got into observability from security, in security companies, there's a lot of focus on remediation, right? Like, we can find stuff, but we also have to fix it. And that was definitely a big expectation of the users. Whereas 3 years ago in observability, that wasn't necessarily the case. Our target audience was pretty happy just to learn about stuff, and that was kind of the set expectation. That's definitely changed now, especially with AI, and there are remediation use cases, and that's starting to be more relevant now in the observability world, like in the last year or so. But that was one of the things, like, I came in and I had my my security background, and I was thinking about all these remediation use cases. And like, at least initially when I started, people were like, oh, you can calm down about that. That's not like really what people are expecting. They just want to see the world in the kind of detail. And there's sort of certain ways that they want to see it, they expect to see it. So that was an interesting change, but ultimately not a huge change. It's kind of easy to see the overlap, and there's a lot of use cases that are similar.
Sure. And sometimes that remediation, or at least some of the remediation, might not be in the same platform where you're finding things, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. In the case of observability, often the remediation is like engineering, coding. You're going to change the way something's going to behave. You're going to go to your microservice. You're going to open up your IDE. You're going to change something and push a PR.
So what was the tipping point that you were able to see when customers expected observability only versus when they said, no, we also need to have remediation in this tool as well?
Yeah, I think that happened gradually, and I think that it happened as our customer base became more diverse. So as we had more different personas coming to our platform, and that happened as our platform expanded. So we started off somewhat niche. We were a pipelines focused company. We're really focusing on cost control and like data manipulation, data portability. And then as we branched out and became a bigger platform trying to go up against the big players, then you get more diverse users and more diverse needs from them. And so then you do have security personas coming and using your platform and expecting more remediation. So yeah, it's just kind of as you grow and as you get more people on board and as your platform gets bigger, you just have more different people right, to serve. Yeah.
Yeah, and greater expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how has what you do and the way you work been changed by AI becoming just a part of everyone's workflow?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, so I mean that's exciting, and we have a new AI product, or it's part of our product. We call it AI Teams, and it was. I mean, I can get into kind of how that went, but like to answer the question a little bit more succinctly, yeah, the expectation was high and everywhere, right? Customers wanted to see it, and customers are really savvy about it, so they understand the difference between like bolted on AI platform and something that really, really gives value. Even before AI, right? There's always this expectation kind of, I don't know, it just kind of stacks, right? You give someone something and they're like, this is cool. And what about the next thing? And this is cool. And what about the next thing? Right. And I think part of our job is trying to anticipate some of that, right? Like when you're talking internally and people are brainstorming and you're getting product ideas, a lot of the time, what I'm telling people is like, that's great. As soon as you hand that to someone, they're going to ask for this other thing too. I'm pretty sure. Right. And like you talk to people and that kind of pans out. So it's like, you know, that's just the nature. You know, you get something and you're like, this is cool. How can I get the better version of it? Right. How can I follow through with that? And I think that, you know, the remediation, that's a natural part of all of that. Right. And so, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, working in more just in the security space, everyone wanted to have that remediation part, but it didn't quite work out, right? Like there was a lot of projects, there was a lot of investment in the remediation side of things. We can detect, but we can also tell you how to remediate. But that was before AI, right? And when AI came along, it became like a very natural fit to put AI into like, okay, let's give you the steps. Like, what should I do? Like, how do I break this down? Can you even do it for me? Right. That becomes the next thing, right? It's great that you can tell me the steps, but why do you have to tell me the steps and why do I have to do them? Why can't you just do them for me? You know, this is a little bit long-winded, but, you know, in our product, we try to create an experience of interacting with a team of professionals, right? So it's a multi-agent platform. You have a multi-channel chatting experience, different rooms for different topics, all of that kind of stuff that you might expect in like Slack or Teams or something like that, right? But then we have our observability platform on the back end. And so all those agents have access to those tools. And so then they can do things like right there in the chat window. So you're talking and then, you know, a chat stream, like a thread pulls up and the agent is answering your question, but then they're also using our platform to answer your question. They're not just talking to you, they're showing you charts, they're, you know, showing you data tables that they're pulling off of our platform that you can review that are relevant. And then you can also go through the UI and go through the platform and see all that stuff for yourself. And the AI can kind of guide you and it's sort of a sidecar capacity through that stuff. So, you know, there's this like putting the conversational interface into the UI and also putting the UI into the conversational interface. It's this reciprocal kind of thing that we're doing. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the story because I'd love to hear the story about how you guys made the decision to, rather than just add chat into it. It sounds like you've really integrated the AI chat. That's just integrated into the product. I'm guessing that was a pretty big overhaul. And
it was a very big overhaul. Yeah. And it was aggressive. So, I mean, you know, it was part of our business strategy. Our founders wanted to make this bet, wanted to go big. We had AWS reInvent. That was what we were targeting to release. And we had, I think, like a 3 or 4 month timeline from zero to reInvent to put this together. And, you know, our competitors were doing the same thing. And I'm very happy to say, you know, we showed up, I think, with the strongest offering. Just in terms of completeness, like you say, right? It's interesting when you say bolted on, because like in some cases, those can be useful. So we also pepper things through. I'll just give one small example. We have a widget where you're writing a cron job, right? And so there's 3 different ways that you can do it. One is like we just have a couple of preset things that we think you're going to use right off the bat. So if that's what you want, you just click once and you're done. Then the second is like a little tool where like you're in a little menu and you're dropping down things and you're building a cron statement. And then there's just like AI, just chat about it, right? Then there's just a box and just describe what you want this cron to be, and then we'll like format it for you. And then you get it out and then you're back in your form. So that's an example of like, you're just kind of putting some AI capability inside of like a traditional kind of UI. And we do that too, right? So it's kind of both. We're peppering that kind of stuff through. But yeah, the main thing and what we think that people are going to want to do most of the time is just kind of say, hey, when I have an alert, send it to the relevant team, right? And these are AI agents and they're going to take care of it. You can set permissions for the AIs where they can actually just go ahead and take action, or they can get permission from a human to take action. And that's like the primary interface, right, that you're going to be working with. But it's a part of our main IA, our structure. So it's like an area of the app that you can go to. But you can really kind of do anything in that area. And you're just kind of talking on these channels with these agents.
Okay. Follow-up question then, because that sounds like a great story. It's like we had this vision, we had this deadline, we needed to have it ready in time for the AWS event. So knowing what you know now, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of that timeline, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh man, that's a great question. The reality is like we were just kind of swimming through that, right? Like it was a huge push, right? It was all hands on deck thing. I'll certainly take credit for the part that I did, but it was a big team effort. Big part of the success was that we had engineers who were really deep into AI and really interested in like tweaking these models and massaging the behaviors of the models and testing them, trying different models, lots and lots of testing of the behavior. So while I was working on kind of the UX, UI experience, like the kind of the pixels of it, these guys were working on the behaviors, and we were having a lot of conversations to kind of define that stuff. And a lot of the conversations were just about like, okay, this is the use case, right? Trying to imagine the use cases, or talking with our customers about their use cases, and then testing them with the AI, like standing it up, trying to make it work. And you get a lot of failures with that, especially kind of early on, and like you're just kind of like looking at this saying like, this is not really convincing, this is not really valuable, how do we make it valuable? And a lot of that magic is down to our engineers, and I didn't have much to do with, but I was in a lot of those conversations advocating for the user and advocating for like, okay, here's the behavior that people are going to expect. This is a better experience to have with an agent than this experience, things like that, right? But it was really just like thinking through all the use cases. We had the vision, our leadership set like the initial vision and the targets, and we had base, but like everyone was involved all the time, and so it was really just kind of, it was a melee, and I'm not really sure like what advice you can give to someone that's just going to go into a melee situation like that, except for like, you just got to ride it out and wake up every day. What can I do today that's going to move the needle? And then tomorrow I'll wake up and worry about what I could do tomorrow to move the needle. That's just kind of the environment that you're in, because things change so quickly in that environment. You're pivoting really hard, like day to day.
Yeah. When you have a tight timeline like that, one of the things that I've seen, and I'm curious if you have this experience as well. When there's a tight timeline, one of the things that can get overlooked or say we don't have enough time for is doing user testing and doing the research. Were you guys able to incorporate user testing and still hit that timeline, or where did that
traditional user testing where we like designed a test, executed the test for a week, and then came back and got the put everything together, and then but we had design partners, so we had customers who we worked closely with, and so that same quick iteration cycle where everyone's talking about what should we do, how should we do it, they're involved, and the customers are involved, our design partners are involved with that. So we're getting very fast feedback, very blunt feedback, which is great, and we're getting it in a timely way, and that's kind of the cadence that we needed to have it. So we were lucky to have those strong partnerships. But no, we did not really have time for the traditional cycle. And in other projects we have, right? Like we do this kind of research, but for this particular project, we just relied on our design partners to give us feedback.
I'm curious, how often were you meeting with them and having feedback sessions? Were they ad hoc, or was it scheduled like, hey, every Monday we're going to give you a progress update and show you where we are and get feedback?
It was scheduled. There were about 3 different folks that we were talking to, and we would talk to like each one like once a week. So we were getting them throughout the week. We were getting feedback.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And we talked about this before we hit record, right? The balancing the research between design partners who are very familiar with the product you're building and new people, so that you're making sure that you're creating a product that's not just for the expert users that have been using your app for a while. So how do you balance research with design partners versus people who are new to your product?
So a lot of it just has to do with, what we're working on and how we're positioning that in the market. And like you said, the timeline for it. The way that I think about research is that it is trying to think of the word, it's a de-risking exercise, right? And so when you're contemplating whether to perform research or what kind of research you want to perform, you think about, okay, what's the bet I'm making and how costly will it be if I get it wrong, right? Because that's what research does. It saves you money and time getting things wrong, right? Let's get it wrong now. And so we show up with the thing that's right, right? So like that's really your litmus test, right? So like everyone believes this. And if everyone is really bullish on something and everyone has high confidence on it, it's going to be harder to convince them to do research. And maybe you don't really need to do research if you have high confidence, right? I mean, that's what I use with stakeholders. I see, okay, this is what we think is the solution. This is what we think we want to do. How confident are we? And what's the cost of getting it wrong?
Yeah.
If we have low confidence, or if we think even if we have high confidence, the cost of getting it wrong is high, then the research is definitely justified, right? Otherwise, you can get away with doing less of it, but you always want some kind of feedback loop, right?
Sure. So the example that pops into my head is if we decide whether we should make this color of this button blue versus a different color that's in our brand guide, like if we get that wrong, it's probably not going to break the company.
Yeah. If you're Amazon or someone and you're at the point of like trying to optimize that and you're doing A/B testing, like that's a completely different practice than what you're doing in the startup world. We're not moving tiny things and trying to optimize them usually, right? We're moving big things off the top end, and we're making big bets. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just realized a question I didn't ask you before is like, how large is your team? Like, let me know, how large is the team as a whole? And then how large is the design and research part of the team?
So the whole team is about 15 folks. Okay. And we're 3, the design team. Yeah.
And what are the roles you have there?
Just senior product designers, basically, are the roles. And that includes like design and research. And we have some folks that are more interested in the research part and take the lead on that.
Gotcha. Okay. Great. On the design side of things, I'll roll back to when we were talking about AI. I know that traditionally, when you're building an app, there are established patterns that exist on the web now for how things work, right? If you want to come up with a brand new way for people to fill out a form, then beware, because you might be designing something that's difficult for people to use. But when it comes to AI, their patterns of the way we interact with AI are still being established. So how much were you able to rely on existing patterns versus create your own?
Yeah, this was, I would say that it was like a remixing kind of experience, right? We weren't creating new patterns from whole cloth, but we were remixing patterns. So, conversational UI or conversational interfaces predate AI. Right? Like we've been talking to each other with text on screens for a while. So we kind of understand those patterns. But then you have these SaaS products that are essentially, giant data repositories with different ways to view and manipulate that data and ask questions of it. And now we're introducing a new affordance to do all that same stuff, which is this conversational interface, right? And, I kind of mentioned this before, but the approach that I kind of advocated for and that we took in the product was, you're embedding conversational elements into your kind of traditional UI, and then you're also embedding traditional UI elements into your conversational AI. So it's reciprocal. I don't know if that, is the trend or how things will go, but it felt right for this product. And it was exciting because, you just mentioned those patterns have kind of solidified over time. And, 10 years ago, you could maybe think, oh, I'm going to design a completely new way to build out a form. People were doing stuff like that, right? And that's fun. As these answers get more solidified, then that's a benefit to everyone, right? That we have these patterns. But it kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of designing if you're not doing that invention. So this gives us an opportunity to do some invention, which is nice. That's a nice little shot in the arm, I think we get.
Yeah, I agree. It has been a lot of fun as we've worked on products that incorporate AI. That's been part of the fun of it. It's like, okay, we've got to figure out how this is going to work, right? Because it's no one knows exactly how we're supposed to implement this stuff yet and which patterns work and which don't. So it does make it more exciting. So there's these new patterns that are emerging. And one of the ones that we were talking about before that's unique is that a lot of times UIs were very deterministic. You click a button, a thing happens, right?
Yeah.
But with the incorporation of AI, it's now like, okay, the user does a thing, and instead of this thing happening next, it's like one of these 30,000 things can happen next. And sometimes you might even get a different answer. I've asked the same question of AI twice in a row, and I'll get a different answer from the same model. So how do you tell me a little bit about what we were talking about before with deterministic versus non-deterministic when it comes to UI?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And that's a challenge, but it's also it can be a benefit, but it's something that you have to control for. And that was something that we really struggled with in the early parts of putting AI teams together. And a lot of work went into making the system more deterministic in ways, right? And that's a UX principle, right? Like you, as a user, you want to be confident if I do X, Y is going to happen. Like I kind of can predict the system. And I think the useful model here, again, is, these are kind of pseudo people. We're kind of treating them like people. And what kind of expectations do you have of people working in an organization, right? It's not that they're deterministic. Right? It's not that they do exactly the same thing all the time, but they are trained. And so like there's a certain amount of predictability for them, right? If they're doing a task and they've been trained to do that task, they're going to do that task pretty much the same way every time. We ask them to use a certain tool, log in here, record this there. They can follow all of that, but at the same time, they're making decisions, right? And so I think that's the kind of behavior that people are going to want to expect. And so in our experience, you start off, and we started plugging in these agents, and we tried to make this thing work. And there was too little determinism. It was just kind of like the Wild West. You just didn't know what to expect, right? And so you start calling that down, and you start kind of enforcing rules, and you start trying to rein that in. And honestly, we're probably still on the side of maybe too non-deterministic, where you need to rein it in a little bit more. But I think eventually you get to a point where like that's enough, like. Right, like the models, the non-determinism of the models is a feature. It's just a feature that you have to kind of control for and kind of keep contained, right? Especially when you're doing these kind of multi-step, remediation workflows.
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, I think another insight here with remediation, and we've been talking about remediation, is that people tend to want it, but they don't tend to trust it. So, like even traditional like automated remediation, right? From a security company kind of standpoint, you're selling these features, you're working on them, and you're like, hey, we can do all this stuff. And customers like that. They want to buy it, and then they don't turn it on because like ultimately they don't actually trust it. They want to be sort of in control of everything, right? But I think attitudes are maybe shifting a little bit with AI. I think it's just that people are getting their hands on it and they're excited about it, so they have more experience with it. And the more experience they get, maybe the more comfortable they get.
Yeah. Do you think it's also that they're learning where the places are that they can just trust AI and where they need to kind of fact check and double check?
Yeah. And I don't think we should like blindly ever trust what the models are doing. But again, like the fact that we can't predict them in some cases is a positive thing, right? And the fact that, again, because that's what we expect of humans, right? So it's about guardrails. Yeah, that was our experience anyway. Like you're starting and it's just kind of wild, and then you're like getting more and more and more control over it and making it more and more kind of predictable.
I always love hearing stories about when things don't go right. So can you think of a time that something went wrong, and what did your team do to fix it? And then what did you learn from from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had an experience with product-led growth in our product, and we just made a lot of missteps. There were a lot of strategies, and I think we ended up kind of cycling pretty quickly through about 4 or 5 completely different approaches. We would do something and then just like rip it out and do something else and rip it out because it wasn't really working. And what I'm talking about is like you're trying to get a new user familiar with your system. And so I think the first thing that we tried was those kind of walkthroughs where like little bubbles pop up and they point to stuff and you're like, this button does this and this button does that, right? And honestly, the reason that we did that was like I joined and we already had a license for a tool that did this and it was just sitting around. Someone had bought it and wanted to do it and didn't do anything. And we set up like, okay, we're going to start doing this PLG action and we're going to try to connect, the experience through the sales cycle into the product, hold your hand, do all of that stuff, right? And so we had this platform and we implemented it and we put stuff in. And we didn't even really learn all that much about how useful it was to people. We did some testing, but the main killer on that was just maintaining it. It wasn't our code. It was finicky. It relied on like CSS selectors that would be dynamic and would change sometimes. You wanted to try to get this thing to be scripted in a certain way. And then, you just couldn't do exactly what you had in mind. So you had to kind of work around it and you had to make all these compromises. And so we had that for a little while and we kind of ripped it out. And then we tried to do our own little home rolled kind of thing that was like something that you can open up at any time, kind of like a help menu, like a mega menu help menu kind of thing. So not just a help menu, but it was like this whole kind of suite of resources and it would kind of take you through that. And then you could go on like little product tours. We weren't really getting traction from that. We're talking to users. And what we really learned was that in the observability space anyway, people had a lot of preconceived notions about how things should work coming from other tools. And our users really didn't want tutorials. They wanted documentation that was good and they wanted, clear, clean experiences. And they wanted them to kind of match mental models that they had. And in the end, I'm not going to say we don't have that kind of motion, but it's a lot more integrated and it's a lot more minimal. We really focus on the use cases of a new user, what they want to do first. And that's typically see my data, right? So like we're trying to get you from zero to see your own data in our platform very quickly. And what we've learned is that when people can do that, then they can evaluate us very quickly and they learn us very quickly because they're putting something that they're familiar with into our context and they just start to grok it, right? So we actually ended up really abandoning the idea that we're going to kind of like hold your hand through the application and like give you this whole introductory period and these product tours and things. And we just want you to get your data into our platform and start poking around at it and demo ability and things like that.
Sure. That's great. That's
but
great.
It was a long journey, and there were a lot of ideas that we kind of put through at that. But that's kind of what we ended up like. For us, less was more.
So this has been great, Micah. I'm gonna ask one last question of you, and that is, what is the best product design advice you've ever gotten?
So this is a weird one. It doesn't necessarily come from product design, but I apply it to product design in a lot of things. When you are looking at a complicated problem and there are a lot of variables that you have to balance, you're trying to figure out, okay, I want to poke this one thing up a little bit and see what the results are. Double it. Don't so say you just have some number, right? And you're like, I need to change this number and I need to see how it's going to weigh out against anything. How much should I change it? Well, just double it and see what happens. If there's not a noticeable effect, double it again. If there's too much of an effect, have it. And I don't know, that kind of is applicable. I've used that idea in a lot of different things. It's kind of a weird one. It's not necessarily like an inspirational kind of thing, but it's very practical. Don't waste your time nudging variables around a little bit at a time. If you want an effect, do something big If it's too much, that's fine. You can always dial it back, but you're going to be wasting your time if you are just trying to like nudge things a little bit at a time, and seeing what happens.
I love that. That was great. Micah, again, this has been awesome just having this conversation with you and nerding out on design and research and cybersecurity. And so thank you for being on the show and sharing your thoughts and your insights. And I appreciate your time.
Yours too. Thanks so much, William.
You're very welcome. All right. See ya.
Thank you.